Ethan Caldwell was a man who had it all: wealth, success, charm, and the kind of effortless confidence that made people gravitate toward him. As the young CEO of Caldwell Enterprises, his days were filled with meetings, deals, and endless social gatherings. Yet amidst the polished marble floors and towering glass walls of his office, there was one thing he couldn't quite figure out: Lila Monroe. Lila was unlike anyone else in the building. A receptionist by title, but a mystery by presence. She was beautiful in the kind of way that didn't demand attention, but quietly stole it. With silky blonde hair usually tied back in a simple ponytail, soft blue eyes that held secrets, and a gentle smile she offered sparingly, Lila managed to stay just out of reach, like a delicate melody you could hear, but not quite place. Ethan had noticed her long before he admitted it to himself. While others gathered in groups, chatting about weekend plans, vacations, and office gossip, Lila remained on the sidelines. She declined invitations to after-work dinners, skipped company parties, and never lingered in conversations that weren't work-related. She was polite but distant, kind but guarded. Every evening, as the city's skyline turned gold with the setting sun, Lila would swiftly gather her things and leave, her movements urgent, as if racing against time. At first, Ethan brushed it off. After all, it wasn't his place to question an employee's personal life. But as days turned into weeks, he found himself glancing at the clock as 5 o'clock neared, unconsciously waiting to see her slip out through the glass doors. His curiosity became a quiet obsession, something he didn't understand but couldn't shake. What could possibly be so important that she never stayed for even a few minutes? Why did she always refuse when invited to company lunches or events? It wasn't arrogance. He could tell that much. There was a humility about her that felt genuine. And yet the urgency in her steps, the careful way she avoided personal questions, made him wonder. One rainy Thursday evening, unable to resist the gnawing curiosity any longer, Ethan made a decision that was entirely out of character. He grabbed his coat, left through the side entrance, and followed her. He kept his distance, cautious not to be seen. The city streets were busy, people hurrying home under umbrellas, but Lila moved quickly, weaving through the crowd with practiced ease. Ethan followed, his pulse unexpectedly quickening. He felt absurd, a millionaire trailing his own receptionist through the rain. But something about Lila, something unspoken, tugged at him in ways he didn't understand. It wasn't about romance or infatuation. It was deeper, rooted in a need to know who she really was. She turned down a narrow side street, one he rarely noticed in his carefully scheduled world. The streetlights flickered, and the hum of the city dulled into an uneasy quiet. Ethan hesitated, then moved closer, careful to keep behind parked cars and darkened doorways. He watched as Lila stopped near a dimly lit alley. From the large canvas tote slung over her shoulder, she began pulling out items: neatly folded clothes, packaged food, and bottled water. Ethan's brow furrowed in confusion. What was she doing here, in the shadows of the city's forgotten streets, with bags full of essentials? One by one, figures emerged from the shadows, women with worn faces and tired eyes. A mother holding a thin child close to her chest, an elderly woman with trembling hands. Lila greeted each one with a tenderness that made Ethan's chest tighten. He saw her kneel beside an older woman, offering a warm coat and gently wrapping it around her frail shoulders. She handed out food, speaking softly, her face illuminated by the dim streetlight, radiant in its kindness. Ethan stood frozen, a mixture of awe and disbelief coursing through him. He realized then that Lila Monroe wasn't simply leaving work early. She was running towards something that mattered more than office parties or social niceties. She was giving pieces of herself to those the world ignored. A wave of guilt washed over him. Here he was, living in penthouses, attending galas, while this young woman, earning a fraction of what he did, was out here feeding and clothing the forgotten souls of the city. It was a side of humanity Ethan rarely saw, a world existing in the alleys and shadows beyond the skyscrapers. His curiosity shifted into something warmer, more aching. Ethan didn't know what to call it yet, but watching Lila with those people, seeing the way she cared so selflessly, stirred something in him he hadn't felt in years. As the wind picked up and the rain began to fall harder, Ethan stayed rooted in place, his eyes never leaving her. A part of him wanted to step forward, to help, to speak, but something held him back. He wasn't ready, not yet. He needed to understand more. And so, in that narrow alley with the city lights blinking above, Ethan Caldwell vowed to follow Lila Monroe again. Not to invade, but to learn. Because for the first time in a long time, his carefully ordered life felt incomplete, and he sensed that the answers he sought were tucked somewhere within the quiet heart of the girl who disappeared into the shadows. The rain fell steadily now, blurring the edges of streetlights and turning the alley into a damp, forgotten corner of the city. Yet amidst the cold and wet, warmth seemed to radiate from where Lila knelt beside a frail elderly woman. Ethan, still hidden in the shadows, watched with wide, unblinking eyes. Lila's voice, though soft, carried through the quiet. "Mrs. Ruth, I brought you your favorite tonight. Chicken soup and those sweet rolls you like," she said, unwrapping the container with careful hands. The old woman's weathered face broke into a smile, the kind of pure, grateful joy that pierced Ethan's heart. One by one, more women approached, some young, some old, most with faces etched by hardship and eyes clouded with pain. Ethan recognized them as the invisible people, the ones city dwellers stepped around, hurried past, pretending not to see. But Lila saw them. More than that, she knew them. She greeted each by name, remembered details, asked about their days. "I saved you these gloves, Annie," Lila said to a middle-aged woman, slipping warm wool over trembling fingers. "And you, Margaret, you said your feet were hurting. I found some new socks for you." Ethan's throat tightened as he noticed her tote bag, now nearly empty. Every item she had brought was something thoughtful, something necessary. These weren't leftovers or things discarded. They were chosen with care. Food neatly packed, clothes laundered and folded, bottles of clean water, bandages, antiseptic. He watched as Lila knelt in the puddled alley beside a young girl, no older than 16, with a cut on her arm. Without hesitation, she took out a small first aid kit, cleaning the wound with practiced gentleness. "You've got to be careful, Mia," she murmured, her voice thick with compassion. "Let's get this patched up." Ethan found himself leaning forward, the scene unraveling like a quiet, aching confession before his eyes. This wasn't a one-time charity gesture. This was a life Lila lived after hours, away from her desk, away from the glass walls and sleek office chairs. A secret life where she wasn't the quiet receptionist but a lifeline for people who had nothing and no one. What struck Ethan most was the sincerity. She wasn't there for recognition, for social media posts or praise. She wasn't doing this as a project, but because her heart left her no other choice. The way she held the old woman's hand, the way she smiled at the shy teenager, the way she laughed softly when someone cracked a joke. It was real. As the hours slipped by, Ethan noticed how the rain mattered little to her. The cold didn't stop her. Her hair clung to her face, her thin coat soaked through, but she kept going, talking, listening, laughing, bandaging, feeding, being present. And that's when he saw it, the small, worn leather wallet she pulled from her coat pocket. Lila counted a few bills, carefully, making sure there was enough to hand to a shivering woman with 2 children. "It's not much," Lila said, slipping the money discreetly into her hand, "but it'll get you through tonight." Ethan's heart stung. He knew how little she made. As her employer, he was aware of every paycheck, every deduction. She earned a modest salary, barely enough for a decent apartment in the city, and yet, she was spending most of it here, in this alley, on these people, night after night. A pang of shame struck him. For years, he'd prided himself on his generosity. The galas he hosted, the foundation dinners he attended. But looking at Lila now, he realized that his grand gestures, though noble on paper, had never truly reached people like this. They were tax deductions and polished speeches. Her giving was raw, humble, and entirely selfless. Ethan pressed his hand against the rough brick wall, steadying himself against the wave of emotion rising in his chest. He felt small, not because of his money or status, but because he realized how blind he'd been to this world. the world his wealth had protected him from. There was a time long ago when Ethan believed himself kind, believed his heart was in the right place. But somewhere along the way, he'd traded empathy for efficiency, compassion for convenience. Lila's quiet rebellion against indifference laid it bare for him. He watched as Lila sat cross-legged on a discarded crate. A circle of women gathered around her like children at story time. She listened as they spoke about lost jobs, abusive husbands, illnesses, broken families. She offered no false promises, only warmth and understanding. Sometimes she shared bits of herself, stories from her own life, her losses, her fears, and in doing so, built a fragile, beautiful community in that forgotten alley. Ethan's chest tightened. He had come seeking answers to a trivial curiosity, and instead found a mirror reflecting his own emptiness. And standing before him was this young woman, overlooked, underestimated, carrying the weight of others' pain with the kind of grace he'd never known. The night wore on, and one by one the women left, taking with them food, clothes, and the priceless gift of having been seen and cared for. Lila packed up her empty bag, exhausted but content. She tilted her face up to the rain, eyes closing briefly, as if offering a silent prayer or simply letting the sky wash away the weight of the night. Ethan, moved beyond words, stepped back into the shadows, watching her walk away. He didn't follow this time. His heart felt too heavy, too full of questions and realizations. He knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Somewhere deep inside, something in Ethan Caldwell had shifted. And for the first time in years, it wasn't a business deal or a social conquest that made him feel alive. It was the kindness of a woman named Lila Monroe. The following morning, Ethan Caldwell sat in his office, sunlight pouring through the tall glass windows, but he barely noticed. His coffee had gone cold. The crisp papers stacked neatly on his desk seemed meaningless now. His mind was haunted by the image of Lila Monroe in that rain-soaked alley, her face glowing in the dim light, her arms laden with warmth for people the world had abandoned. For the first time in years, business could wait. He opened his laptop, pulling up her employee file. Nothing remarkable on the surface. Born in Oregon, 25 years old, employed with Caldwell Enterprises for 3 years. A clean, quiet record. No disciplinary marks, no promotions either. A receptionist, invisible to most. But Ethan wasn't interested in numbers anymore. He wanted to understand her, the woman behind the soft smile and shy glances. He started digging deeper. Public records, charity databases, even local social service files. What he found unraveled him. Lila Monroe had no parents listed. She'd grown up in the foster system, shuffled between homes in different states. The records were heartbreaking: neglect, abandonment, a few runaways. And yet, no criminal record, no complaints. Just a girl lost in the system, surviving silently. She graduated high school with average grades but received multiple community service awards, volunteering in shelters, helping at church food drives, cleaning parks. Always giving, always invisible. What struck Ethan most was a small, handwritten blog post she had submitted years ago to a charity website titled "The Ones We Walk Past." In it, she wrote, "I know what it's like to be unseen. I know what it's like to feel like you don't matter. If I can ease that pain for one person, even for a moment, then I'm doing what I was meant to do." Ethan's throat tightened as he read those words, realizing they perfectly described what he'd witnessed the night before. He kept reading, learning how Lila had worked part-time jobs through college, donating what little she earned, how she continued the habit after joining his company, quietly funneling 80% of her modest paycheck to buy food, blankets, clothes, and medicine for the homeless women she called her night family. She never posted about it, never sought sponsorships, never joined social campaigns. No social media clout, no public gratitude, just anonymous kindness. Ethan leaned back, closing his eyes, overwhelmed. What had his life become? Lavish parties, hollow conversations, deals, and accolades. All while a woman like Lila existed within arm's reach, carrying a heart big enough to hold strangers' sorrows, sacrificing what little she had to bring warmth to those left in the cold. And she did it without bitterness, without complaint. The next evening, Ethan found himself back near that same alley, dressed in plain clothes, a cap pulled low over his eyes. But this time, he carried something too. Bags filled with food, fresh clothes, medicine, and supplies. He'd gone to the same places she frequented, buying what he thought would help. He didn't approach her, though. Instead, he left the bags nearby, hidden in plain sight, and watched from a distance. Lila arrived like a beam of quiet light. Her face lit up when she found the extra supplies. Confused at first, she looked around, her expression soft with gratitude, though she had no idea who had left them. Without hesitation, she used them for the women gathered around her, as if they'd fallen from the sky itself. Ethan smiled sadly. He wasn't ready to reveal himself yet, not until he understood the pull she had on him. Not until he could explain the ache in his chest every time he saw her kneel in the mud to bandage a stranger's hand. Night after night, he continued this silent vigil, funding supplies, making quiet donations, and visiting other shelters she frequented, always from a distance. He learned which women she worried about most. The girl named Mia, who struggled with addiction, Mrs. Ruth, who coughed too much, Margaret, whose feet were always cold. Each one had a story, and Lila carried their stories with her like invisible stones in her pockets. Ethan began to notice other things too. The way her face would crumple in quiet worry when someone didn't show up. The fierce way she defended the women when a passerby sneered or shouted cruel words. And somehow, through it all, she never stopped smiling. A soft, kind smile that carried no judgment, only love. His admiration grew. It wasn't just kindness, it was courage. It was strength. It was something deeper than he'd ever witnessed in anyone. And somewhere in that quiet corner of the city, hidden beneath worn-out coats and trembling hands, Ethan Caldwell felt something unexpected blossom inside him. A longing not only to be part of this world she created, but to know the heart of the woman who built it. She wasn't just the receptionist anymore. She was Lila, the woman who gave her light to those the world left behind. And Ethan, the millionaire who thought he had everything, was falling deeply, quietly, helplessly in love. The days that followed were unlike any Ethan Caldwell had lived before. For the first time, the weight of luxury felt heavy on his shoulders. The perfectly tailored suits, the glistening penthouse, the endless stream of important calls, none of it could quiet the voice in his head, the one that whispered Lila Monroe's name with every breath. He couldn't stay away. But Ethan also knew better than to rush into Lila's fragile world with loud confessions or grand gestures. Her kindness wasn't meant to be rewarded. It was something pure, untouched by expectations. If he barged in carelessly, he risked breaking what made her so rare. So, he chose the shadows. Through quiet donations, Ethan began anonymously sending better supplies to the shelters and alleys she visited. Boxes of warm blankets, thick enough to brave winter's bite. Fresh food, not the canned leftovers usually passed along to the forgotten, but hearty meals packed with care. Medicine for coughs, fevers, and aching wounds. A silent guardian leaving traces of hope. He made sure the deliveries were never traced back to him. No names, no hints, just kindness, like hers. And Lila noticed. Every evening after work, she would arrive at her usual spots, her tired face lighting up with cautious joy when she found the unexpected supplies. She would clasp her hands together, eyes shining, her voice trembling as she murmured, "Thank you, whoever you are." She thought it was a miracle, or perhaps some kind-hearted stranger who had seen what others refused to see. She shared the bounty without hesitation, wrapping trembling shoulders in fresh blankets, dividing the meals among hungry mouths, tucking medicine into worn coat pockets. The sight filled Ethan with a warmth he couldn't explain. Back in his office, however, his changed behavior didn't go unnoticed. Jacob, his closest friend and business partner, had begun observing the subtle differences. Ethan, once sharp-tongued and relentless, now stared absently out of windows during meetings. He was late to calls. He skipped high society events. The endless business deals that once thrilled him seemed to blur into meaninglessness. One evening, after a particularly tense meeting, Jacob cornered him in the private lounge of their building. "All right," Jacob began, setting down his glass with a deliberate thud. "What's going on with you?" Ethan, startled from his thoughts, forced a smile. What do you mean? I mean, Jacob leaned forward, eyes narrowing. This isn't you. You've changed, man. You're distracted, skipping out on everything we built for years. And don't tell me it's business stress. We're making more money than ever. Ethan sighed, raking a hand through his dark hair. He debated lying, brushing it off. But something about the relentless kindness he'd witnessed in Lila made him crave honesty for once. It's a girl, Ethan admitted quietly. Jacob raised a brow. A girl? Well, that explains it. Who is she? Some heiress? A model? One of those influencers you swore you'd never date? Ethan shook his head, a wry, almost wistful smile playing on his lips. None of those. She works for us. Lila Monroe. She's incredible, Jacob. You wouldn't believe the things she does after hours. I've followed her. Not in a creepy way, he added quickly when Jacob's eyes widened. But I had to know. She spends almost everything she makes helping homeless women and beggars. No cameras, no glory. Just heart. Jacob sat back, stunned into silence. She lives modestly, Ethan continued, his voice roughening with emotion. Grew up in foster homes, hurt by life. But she still finds a way to give. I've watched her bandage wounds, listened to stories, hold people who've been forgotten by the world. And here I am, sitting on billions, never lifting a finger for anyone but myself. Jacob exhaled slowly. Damn, Ethan. I don't even know what to say. I've been trying to help her quietly, Ethan confessed. Sending supplies, food, medicine. She doesn't know it's me. And I don't know how to approach her. She's not like the women I've dated, Jacob. She's better, real. If I show up now, it'll scare her off. She's not after money, and she's been hurt too much to trust easily. Jacob was quiet for a moment, then clapped a hand on his friend's shoulder. I never thought I'd say this about you, but you've got it bad, man. Ethan chuckled softly, a trace of sadness in his eyes. Yeah, I do, Jacob gave him a thoughtful look. You're right to be careful. Someone like her, she's built different. You can't storm into her life like you do business deals. Maybe the best thing you can do for now is keep supporting her. Let her world grow stronger. And when the time's right, when she knows she can lean on you without fear, then you tell her. Ethan nodded, grateful for the advice. I just don't want to be the guy who ruins the one good thing she has left, Ethan said quietly. You won't, Jacob reassured him, because this time you actually care. And with that, the two friends sat in silence, the city lights sprawling out before them, while Ethan's heart ached for a woman who had unknowingly changed everything. Little did he know, fate was already setting their worlds on a collision course. The evening sky had turned a deep shade of charcoal when the storm hit the city. Ethan Caldwell was sitting at his desk, poring over paperwork, when a flash of lightning illuminated the skyline. He looked out the window, noticing the rain that came down in sheets, the streets slowly becoming rivers of water. His mind, however, wasn't on the work at hand. It had been weeks since he started his silent support for Lila Monroe, and every night he watched her from a distance, ensuring she had what she needed to carry on her mission. Yet tonight was different. Something told him that tonight was going to change everything. He had just stepped out of his office when his phone buzzed with a text from Jacob. Ethan, what's going on with you? You've been gone all evening. Ethan barely glanced at it as he stuffed the phone back into his jacket pocket and moved to the elevator. The city had emptied, but not the alleys. Ethan knew she would be out there, doing what she did best, helping the people no one cared about. When he reached the alley she frequented, he saw her immediately. She was rushing through the downpour, her dark hair plastered to her face, her soaked coat clinging to her slender frame. In her arms, she held a bundle of food and supplies, struggling to keep everything from being drenched. But it was what she was heading towards that caught his attention. A sick woman, frail and barely standing, her shoulders trembling beneath a thin, worn-out coat. Ethan recognized her immediately. Mrs. Harlow. She had been living on the streets for years, her body beaten by time and cold, her legs weak from years of walking and standing in poverty. Lila rushed to her side, trying to support her, but the storm was too much. The older woman swayed, and Ethan watched helplessly as she collapsed into Lila's arms. His heart raced. Without thinking, he sprinted toward them, splashing through puddles. "Lila!" he called out, his voice cutting through the roar of the rain. She turned, startled, her eyes wide with surprise. I I need to get her to shelter," Lila shouted, her voice straining against the rain and wind. "She's so weak. I can't leave her here." Ethan, chest heaving from running, took a breath, his voice softer than he intended. "Let me help." Lila looked at him for a long moment, her eyes wary. She didn't know him like that. Just the receptionist at Caldwell Enterprises. The man who had anonymously left supplies for her. The man she had never spoken to outside of work. I I can't let you help," she murmured, her hands shaking as she attempted to lift Mrs. Harlow. "I have a car," Ethan said quickly. "I can get her to a hospital or a shelter. You don't have to carry her in this storm." Lila hesitated, her brow furrowing as she stared at Ethan. Trust didn't come easy for her, not after everything she'd been through. But Mrs. Harlow was in no shape to be out here in this weather. Finally, she nodded, though her expression was still guarded. "Okay, but you're helping her, not me." Ethan didn't care about that. He crouched beside her, gently lifting the frail woman in his arms. Mrs. Harlow muttered something incoherent, her eyes half closed, but Lila's soft voice reassured her as she guided him towards his car. The three of them moved quickly, the wind howling around them, but the warmth of the car was a welcome relief when they finally made it inside. Ethan quickly started the engine, the wipers slapping furiously at the glass. Lila sat beside him, her hands clutching her coat tightly as she glanced at him, her expression a mixture of uncertainty and reluctant gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't usually let people help." "I know," Ethan replied, his voice steady. But tonight was different. The rain continued to pound against the windows as they drove through the storm. The silence between them was palpable, but neither seemed to mind. Lila's eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, checking on Mrs. Harlow, making sure she was okay. "Do you have family?" Ethan suddenly asked, his voice breaking through the quiet tension. Lila looked at him, her brow furrowing. It wasn't something she liked talking about. "No," she said, her voice low. "I grew up in foster care. Never really had a family." She paused for a moment, her gaze turned out the window as she seemed to withdraw into herself. "That's why I try to help people. I know what it's like to feel invisible, alone." Ethan's heart sank as he absorbed her words. The pain, the vulnerability she rarely showed, was right there in front of him. She wasn't just giving because she could. She was giving because it was the only way she knew how to cope with her own loneliness. "I never had much either," Ethan confessed, his voice quieter than usual. "I grew up in a big house, but my parents, they were never really there. Everything was always about appearances, business. I was just a tool in their empire." Lila turned to him, her eyes softening. "Sounds lonely." Ethan nodded slowly. "It was, but at least I had everything I needed. Money, power. You gave up everything for people who might never thank you." Lila looked at him, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. It was rare for someone to acknowledge what she did. "I don't do it for thanks," she replied quietly. "I do it because someone has to. Because I don't want anyone else to feel like I did." The car came to a stop in front of a small, humble shelter. Lila immediately unbuckled her seatbelt, her eyes locking with Ethan's for the first time. "I'm sorry for doubting you," she said softly. I don't trust easily." Ethan's gaze softened as he looked at her, his heart pounding. "I get it. I don't trust easily either." The storm outside continued to rage, but in that moment inside the car, there was something different, a connection, a raw, unspoken bond that neither of them had expected, but both felt deep in their hearts. Lila gathered herself, ready to leave, but paused before opening the door. "I don't know who you are, but thank you for helping Mrs. Harlow, for understanding." Ethan smiled, his chest tight with emotion. "You don't need to know who I am, but you should know that I'll always be here. For you. For them." Lila didn't respond immediately. She only nodded, her eyes lingering on him for just a moment before she stepped out into the rain, disappearing into the shelter. Ethan sat in the car for a while longer, his thoughts swirling. He knew he'd never be the same. The storm outside had brought them closer in ways he didn't fully understand, and the quiet exchange had left a mark on his soul. For the first time in his life, he felt a sense of purpose, not from the empire he'd inherited, but from a woman who had everything to give and nothing to take. The following days passed in a haze of uncertainty and intrigue for Lila Monroe. After that stormy night, she couldn't stop thinking about Ethan Caldwell, the man who had helped her so selflessly, who had been there when Mrs. Harlow needed him most. She had told herself not to get too involved, to keep a safe distance, but his kindness, his quiet strength, had stayed with her, gnawing at her heart. Ethan had seen her vulnerability, had witnessed her raw compassion for the people she helped, and still, he hadn't recoiled. There was something in him, something real, that made her think he might not be like the others in her life. But who was he really? That question lingered in her mind, and the more she thought about it, the more she realized she had to know. She couldn't keep wondering, not when everything she had believed about the world, about people, had already been shaken by one single encounter. The next day, as she sat at her desk, Lila overheard a conversation in the office. It was just a few whispers, the kind that people thought no one else could hear, but enough to catch her attention. "Did you hear?" one voice said. "Ethan Caldwell's name's all over the news. Turns out he's not just some corporate guy, but the heir to the Caldwell fortune. Millionaire, billionaire even." Lila's heart dropped. The words echoed in her mind as she pieced them together. Ethan was the heir to one of the wealthiest families in the country? She had always suspected there was more to him than met the eye. But this was something else entirely. Her breath hitched. The man who had helped her so effortlessly, who had acted like he didn't have a care in the world, was a millionaire? She felt a surge of confusion and disbelief. She'd been deceived. Or had she? Determined to confront him, to finally understand, Lila found Ethan in the break room later that day. She watched him for a moment as he stood by the coffee machine, his posture relaxed, his usual easygoing smile tugging at his lips. "You're a millionaire," she said bluntly, cutting straight to the point. There was no time for games. Not anymore. Ethan froze, the smile on his face faltering for a split second before he turned to her, his eyes soft with understanding. "I guess the word's out." He placed the coffee mug down, the sound of it gently clinking on the counter. Lila folded her arms, her gaze unwavering. "Why didn't you tell me?" Ethan's expression grew serious, and he took a step toward her. "It wasn't important," he said quietly. "I never wanted you to see me as some rich guy. I wanted you to see me for who I really am." Lila shook her head, her mind racing. "But why help me? You don't have to do anything like that. You could have done anything with your money, anything you wanted, but you chose to help people like me." "Why?" Ethan sighed, leaning against the counter. "Because I saw you, Lila. I saw what you do for people with nothing, and I realized I've spent my life with everything, and yet I felt like I had nothing. Nothing that mattered. And then I saw you and I thought, maybe you could teach me what it means to give, to truly care about something beyond yourself." Lila's eyes softened, her gaze searching his face for any sign of deceit. But there was none, just honesty, vulnerability, a raw sincerity she hadn't expected from someone like him. "I didn't know who you were when I helped you that night," Ethan continued. "I didn't know you were the woman I'd seen for weeks helping others. I didn't know you were this incredible, selfless person who's dedicated her life to helping people who have nothing." Lila looked down, unsure of how to respond. She'd spent so many years hiding behind her own walls, never allowing anyone to get close, especially not someone like Ethan. And yet here he was, exposing parts of himself she hadn't expected. Raw, vulnerable, and open. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the truth hung heavy in the air, a quiet tension building between them. Finally, Lila let out a slow breath, her voice low. I'm not who you think I am, Ethan. I don't deserve this. Your help, your attention. I'm just someone who's trying to make up for all the things I didn't have growing up. trying to help the people who didn't have a chance. Ethan stepped closer, his hand gently brushing against her arm, grounding her. You're more than enough, Lila. You don't need to be anyone other than who you are. You've given so much more than most people would ever even consider. That's why I admire you. Lila looked up at him, her heart racing. He wasn't backing down. He wasn't pulling away. There was no judgment in his eyes, only admiration. They stood there for a moment, the weight of the unspoken words pressing between them. But there was a shift, a quiet understanding that began to grow. They weren't just two people from different worlds anymore. They were two people who had learned what it meant to give and to receive. Later that week, they found themselves working together in the same homeless shelter. It wasn't formal, not at first. It started with small gestures, a smile, an offer to help move supplies, a shared conversation with the people they were serving. But each moment chipped away at the distance between them. They were no longer strangers, no longer just co-workers. They were allies, fighting side by side for a cause bigger than themselves. Lila watched as Ethan spoke with the homeless women, his voice kind and thoughtful, as though he truly cared about their well-being. She saw the way he'd taken over organizing donations, even when no one was watching. He was doing this because he wanted to, not because he had to. Ethan, she said quietly as they sat together during a brief break, why are you really doing this? You have everything you could want. Money, power. Why this? Ethan paused, looking out the window at the street outside, the weight of her question sinking in. Because I realized I was wasting my life. I've spent so much time chasing things that don't matter, building an empire that doesn't fill the hole inside me. But you've shown me what it's like to give without expecting anything in return, to love without needing recognition. Lila's heart skipped a beat, the sincerity in his voice making her chest tighten. I didn't know I was showing you anything. You showed me everything, Lila, Ethan replied softly. You showed me what real love looks like. Love for people, for life, for kindness. And now, I want to give that back to you. The silence between them was thick with emotion. Ethan didn't need to say anything more. The truth had already settled in. Lila wasn't just changing the lives of the people around her. She was changing his life, and he was beginning to realize just how deeply he cared for her. Ethan Caldwell sat across from his best friend Jacob at a small cafe, the two of them nursing cups of coffee that had long since cooled. Ethan's hands were restless, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. His thoughts were a whirlwind, chaotic and tumultuous, as they had been for the past few weeks. The truth of what he felt for Lila Monroe had settled deep within him, and now it was a weight he couldn't ignore any longer. Jacob, ever the perceptive one, noticed the shift in his friend immediately. He'd seen Ethan nervous before, seen him wrangle with complicated feelings, but this was different. This was something that went deeper, something that Ethan didn't know how to put into words. And knowing Ethan, that was saying a lot. Okay, man, Jacob said, leaning forward with a smirk. You've been off for days. Spill it. What's going on? Ethan sighed, the sound heavy and reluctant, as though he were carrying a burden that he couldn't quite place. It's Lila, he admitted, his voice low and strained. Jacob raised an eyebrow, a grin pulling at his lips. Ah, the receptionist. I knew it. You've been acting different ever since that night in the rain. Ethan's eyes narrowed, but there was no malice in his gaze, only the vulnerability that had been simmering just beneath the surface for too long. It's not just that, Jacob. It's everything. The way she cares about people, the way she helps without ever asking for anything in return. I've never met anyone like her. Jacob took a slow sip from his coffee, a quiet laugh escaping his lips. You're in love with her, aren't you? The words hit Ethan like a hammer, but they were strangely comforting. It felt good to say them out loud, even if they sounded like a confession he wasn't quite ready to fully admit to himself. I think I am, he murmured. I didn't plan for it. I never expected it. But she's different. She makes me want to be a better person. Jacob leaned back in his chair, his eyes studying Ethan with a mixture of amusement and understanding. Well, man, I'm not surprised. Lila's been on a different level since day one. But the fact that you're feeling this way, that's huge. You're not the kind of guy who just falls for anyone." Ethan's gaze dropped to the table, his hands fiddling with the empty coffee cup in front of him. "I've spent my whole life building an empire, trying to prove something to everyone, my family, the world. But with her, I feel like I've been chasing the wrong things. She's shown me what really matters. I can't get her out of my mind, Jacob. And every time I think about how she's been helping the homeless, giving away so much of what she has, I feel like I don't even deserve to be around her." Jacob leaned forward, his eyes softening with empathy. "Ethan, man, you've got to stop thinking like that. She doesn't need you to be perfect. She needs you to be real. And I think she sees something in you too. You've been by her side for weeks now, supporting her, even if you're doing it from the shadows. You're showing her a side of you that she can't ignore." Ethan smiled faintly, though there was still a tinge of uncertainty in his heart. "I don't know how to approach her. I don't want to scare her away. I don't want her to think I'm some rich guy who's just looking for an easy way into her life." Jacob's grin widened. "Well, I'd say you've already got that part down. You're showing her who you really are, and that's the most important thing. But if you're going to do something about it, you need to stop holding back." Ethan took a deep breath, his mind swirling with possibilities. Jacob was right. He had to stop holding himself back. He had to be honest with Lila, with his own feelings. But how? Meanwhile, across the city, Lila Monroe was coming to a realization of her own. She had spent so many years building walls around her heart, protecting herself from the disappointment and betrayal she had felt growing up. But in Ethan, she was starting to see something different. Something that made her heart race and her chest tighten with an unfamiliar longing. At first, she had written him off as just another wealthy man with his own agenda. But as she spent more time with him, working together to help those who had nothing, she started to see the real Ethan. The man who was quietly dedicated to making the world a better place, who had no need for recognition or applause. He was different from the others she had encountered in her life. Ethan's quiet support, his dedication to helping the homeless without asking for anything in return, had touched something deep inside her. She couldn't deny the way he made her feel, the way he saw her not as a charity case or a poor girl trying to make a difference, but as someone worthy of love and respect. The more time they spent together, the more Lila realized that Ethan wasn't like the other millionaires she had known. He didn't have an inflated ego or an obsession with power. Instead, he had a quiet strength that made her feel safe, a gentleness that made her feel seen. And when she saw him at the shelter last week, working alongside her without hesitation, carrying boxes, organizing donations, and speaking to the women there with genuine care, her heart had skipped a beat. She realized then that she was falling for him. Hard. But as much as she wanted to give in to her feelings, she couldn't ignore the doubts in her mind. Was he only helping because of who he was? Because of his wealth? Or was it something more? Could a man like Ethan truly love someone like her? Her heart ached with the uncertainty, but deep down, she knew she couldn't keep pretending. She had to face her own fears, take the leap, and allow herself to open up. Ethan was already giving her so much: kindness, love, and respect. Maybe it was time for her to give him the same in return. As the days went on, Lila and Ethan's collaboration to support the homeless became more organized, more deliberate. They started planning charity events, gathering supplies, and working together to help as many women and children as they could. The events were small at first, but they quickly grew in scale. The gratitude they received from the people they helped was overwhelming, and with each new event, Lila's respect and affection for Ethan deepened. They would stay up late into the night, poring over spreadsheets and donation lists, discussing new ways to raise awareness, their conversation often punctuated by laughter, the kind of laughter that made Lila's heart swell. It was more than just charity work now. It was a bond, a partnership, and an unspoken connection that neither of them could deny. They were in this together, and as the days passed, they both realized that what had started as a shared passion for helping others had slowly transformed into something much more personal. Ethan was no longer just the wealthy businessman who had secretly funded her causes. He was the man who was slowly but surely stealing her heart, and she, in turn, was doing the same. The office was buzzing with tension. A whispered scandal had quickly spread like wildfire, and no one was immune to its reach. Lila Monroe, the quiet receptionist who had always kept to herself, was the center of a storm she hadn't seen coming. A report had been filed, accusing her of embezzling company funds, a sum that was small but damning enough to create suspicion. The allegations were a complete shock to Lila, whose life had always been about helping others, not betraying trust. The accusations were unfounded, yet the damage had already been done. Whispers turned into full-blown gossip, and the atmosphere in the office had shifted overnight. Colleagues who had once greeted Lila with polite smiles now avoided her with cold stares. The friendly banter that used to fill the reception area was replaced by a heavy silence that hung in the air like a cloud. Lila had never been a part of the office drama, and she certainly never sought the spotlight. She preferred to keep to herself, quietly doing her job and using her small salary to support the causes she held dear. But now her name was being dragged through the mud, and she didn't know how to defend herself. The very thought of someone believing she could do something so malicious crushed her. As she sat at her desk, her heart sinking under the weight of the false accusations, she felt a presence beside her. It was Ethan. He had been watching the situation unfold with growing frustration, but he hadn't yet said a word to anyone. The billionaire, who was always so composed, so in control, seemed uncharacteristically troubled. His usual calm was replaced with a quiet determination that gave Lila a flicker of hope. She looked up and their eyes met. For a moment there was only silence, but it was a silence full of unspoken understanding. Ethan knew she hadn't stolen anything, and more than that, he knew she didn't deserve to be caught up in this scandal. Without a word, Ethan stepped forward, walking over to her desk with a sense of purpose. He stopped in front of her, his blue eyes scanning the room with an intensity that made everyone else fall still. The murmurs of gossip quieted as his voice rang out, steady and unwavering. "Everyone, listen up!" Ethan's voice cut through the office noise like a blade. "Lila Monroe has been accused of something she did not do. I am here to tell you all that those accusations are false, and I will not stand by while an innocent person's character is destroyed." Lila felt a rush of emotions at his words. Relief, surprise, and something deeper that she couldn't quite put her finger on. Ethan's stance was firm, his gaze fixed on the room as if daring anyone to challenge him. The strength of his resolve made her heart flutter. He continued, his voice growing stronger. "Lila Monroe is one of the most selfless people I know. What you don't know is that she has been using a large portion of her salary to help those less fortunate, the homeless, the hungry, the forgotten. She spends her evenings caring for people who have no one else. She has a heart of gold, and to accuse her of theft is an insult to everything she stands for." The room was dead silent. No one spoke for a long moment, as if everyone were processing the shock of what they just heard. Lila's face burned with embarrassment, and yet there was something else, a warmth that spread through her chest, making her feel both overwhelmed and grateful. Ethan had just revealed a side of her life that she had kept hidden, and although it was uncomfortable, there was a part of her that appreciated the truth being spoken. Ethan turned to her, his expression softening. "Lila, I want you to know that I will stand by you through this, no matter what. No one here knows the real you, but I do, and I will make sure the truth comes to light." Lila's breath caught in her throat. His words, his unwavering support, meant more to her than she could possibly express. She had never expected anyone, especially not someone like Ethan, to step up for her like this. It was more than just his money or his position of power. It was the sincerity in his eyes, the way he believed in her, even when the world seemed to be against her. "I don't deserve this," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I never wanted anyone to know about my charity work. It was never for recognition. I just wanted to help." Ethan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, his touch reassuring. "I know, Lila. You never asked for anything in return. But sometimes the world needs to see people like you, people who are making a difference, so they can understand the kind of person you truly are." Lila nodded, swallowing back the lump in her throat. She could feel the weight of the office's scrutiny, but Ethan's support gave her a strength she hadn't known she had. She wasn't alone anymore. The office manager, Marissa, stepped forward, her expression a mixture of shock and hesitation. "Ethan, we didn't know." We had no idea about Lila's charity work. Ethan met her gaze with an unflinching stare. That's because Lila doesn't do this for attention. She doesn't want praise. But now the truth is out, and I won't let anyone tarnish her name again. The rest of the office watched in stunned silence as Ethan continued to stand by Lila. No one dared to speak, but the atmosphere had changed. The whispers had stopped, replaced by the realization that perhaps they had misjudged her. And perhaps they had misjudged Ethan as well. Lila stood, her knees weak from the overwhelming emotions coursing through her. She had never expected anyone to speak up for her like this, especially not Ethan. But here he was, doing just that, and her heart swelled with gratitude. He didn't care about her past, about her modest life or her small salary. All he cared about was the truth. "Thank you, Ethan," Lila said, her voice barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of everything she felt. I don't know what to say." Ethan smiled softly, his blue eyes warm with affection. "You don't have to say anything, Lila. You've done enough. You've already shown the world the kind of person you are." The office was no longer silent. Conversations began to bubble up, and the once judgmental atmosphere had been replaced by something else, something more hopeful. Lila had been vindicated, not just by Ethan's words, but by the undeniable truth of her actions. And though the accusations still hung in the air like a shadow, Lila knew that she would not have to face them alone. She had Ethan by her side, and that made all the difference. The days following the scandal had been a whirlwind. The truth had come to light, and Lila's name had been cleared, but something inside her had changed. The way people looked at her, the way they treated her, had shifted. She had been known for so long as just the quiet receptionist, the one who kept to herself and did her job with quiet dedication. Now she was a symbol, not just of innocence, but of selflessness. People began to see her for who she truly was, and it felt both overwhelming and freeing. But amidst all of this, one thing had remained constant: Ethan. Since the moment he had stood up for her in front of the entire office, she had felt a sense of deep gratitude and respect for him. He wasn't just the millionaire CEO. He was someone who saw her, truly saw her, in a way that no one ever had before. It was on one quiet evening, as the two of them stood outside the office building, watching the city lights flicker to life, that Ethan finally decided to speak the words that had been weighing on his heart. "Lila," he began, his voice soft yet steady. He turned to face her, his gaze intense but filled with tenderness. "There's something I need to tell you, something I've been holding back for a while." Lila looked up at him, her heart skipping a beat. She could feel the tension in the air, could sense that this conversation was different from the many others they had shared. Her stomach fluttered, and she nervously tugged at the sleeve of her jacket. "Ethan, what is it?" she asked, her voice quiet but full of curiosity. He took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm not saying this because you're beautiful, or because you've been through so much. I'm saying this because I've come to realize something about you, and about myself." He paused, his words lingering in the air. "I've watched you for so long, seen the way you care for others, the way you give so much of yourself without expecting anything in return. And in doing so, you've shown me a version of myself that I didn't know existed." Lila's heart raced as she listened. She had never imagined that someone like Ethan, someone with his wealth, his status, his life, could see her in such a way. She had always known him as the confident, successful businessman who could have any woman he wanted. But in this moment, she realized that Ethan wasn't talking about her outward appearance. He wasn't talking about her role in the office or the way she helped others. He was talking about something much deeper. "I've fallen in love with you, Lila," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Not because you're perfect, but because of the heart you carry, the way you make the world a better place, even when no one is watching. I'm in love with the way you see people, the way you care for them, the way you put others before yourself." Lila stood there, frozen in place. Her mind raced, but she couldn't find the words to respond. She had never expected this. Ethan, the man who seemed to have everything, was confessing his feelings to her, a woman who had spent most of her life in foster care. living modestly, and whose only real wealth was the kindness she gave to the world. She felt a sudden wave of doubt. Was she worthy of his love? Could someone like her, with so little, with such a humble life, truly fit into his world? Leela had always believed that love was something that existed beyond wealth, beyond status. But now, standing in front of Ethan, she questioned everything she had believed about herself. I, I don't know what to say, she whispered, her voice tinged with uncertainty. You're a millionaire, Ethan. You have everything. You could have anyone. I'm just me. I don't belong in your world. Ethan's eyes softened, and he took a step closer, reaching out to gently lift her chin so that their gazes locked. Lila, he said, his voice full of conviction, love knows no class, no limits. It doesn't matter how much money I have or how little you think you have. What matters is who we are when we're together. And I believe that together, we can do so much more for the world. You've shown me what it truly means to care for others, to give selflessly. I want to be by your side in every way, not because of your kindness, but because of who you are, the person I've come to admire and love. His words hit Lila like a wave, washing away her fears, her insecurities. She had always kept her heart guarded, afraid that the people she loved would one day leave her. But Ethan wasn't like anyone she had ever met. He wasn't looking at her as a charity case or as someone who didn't belong in his world. He was looking at her with pure admiration and love. Lila's breath caught in her throat. For the first time in her life, she felt seen in a way that was deeper than anything she had ever experienced. It wasn't about what she had done or what she had accomplished. It was about who she was at her core. Someone who loved without expecting anything in return, who gave selflessly, who had a heart that was open to the world. With tears welling in her eyes, Lila took a deep breath and finally spoke. Ethan, I never expected this, but I've fallen in love with you too. Not because you're a millionaire, not because of what you can give me, but because of the person you are. You've shown me that love is about more than just what we have or where we come from. It's about what we can give to each other. And I want to be with you, not because of what you have, but because of the man you've become through my love. Ethan's face lit up, and he gently cupped her face in his hands. Then it's settled, he said, his voice thick with emotion. We'll make this work. Together. No matter what. Lila smiled, her heart overflowing with love. In that moment, the world outside seemed to disappear, and all that mattered was Ethan, standing before her, offering her everything she had ever wanted. Love, support, and the promise of a future where they could change the world together. As Ethan leaned in to kiss her, Lila felt her heart soar. Love had found her in the most unexpected of places. Not in the grandeur of wealth, but in the simplicity of a shared heart, a shared purpose, and the belief that together, they could make a difference. And as they kissed, Lila knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. One filled with love, kindness, and a future that was brighter than either of them had ever imagined. The city had changed in more ways than one. It wasn't just about skyscrapers touching the sky or luxury stores lined with the wealthiest brands anymore. It was about the people, those who had once been forgotten, overlooked, or disregarded. And in that shift, Ethan and Lila had become symbols of hope, not because of the money they had, but because of the love and compassion they carried in their hearts. The foundation they had established for homeless women and children was not just a charity, it was a movement. It was a living testament to Lila's quiet strength, to her mother's memory, and to the foster siblings she had lost. It was a vision of what the world could be if everyone gave a little more of themselves, if everyone cared just a little more. In the years since Ethan and Lila had come together, the foundation had grown exponentially. What began as a small initiative, born out of Lila's desire to make a difference, had blossomed into a citywide effort. Shelters were filled with warmth, food, and care. Women and children who had once lived on the streets were now receiving education, job training, and support. And all the while, Lila remained humble, refusing to accept any credit for the incredible transformation she had sparked. But today, on the anniversary of the foundation's founding, Something extraordinary was about to happen. Lila had agreed to deliver a televised speech, one that had the potential to touch millions. It was her chance to speak directly to the world, to share her truth, her message, and the love she had found with Ethan. Ethan stood by her side, his arm gently wrapped around her waist as they prepared for the broadcast. He could see the nervousness in her eyes, but he also saw the strength. He had watched her grow from a quiet, kind-hearted receptionist into a woman who had changed the very fabric of their city. And now, standing beside him, she was about to share her truth with the world. "Are you ready?" he asked softly, his voice full of reassurance. Lila smiled, but it was a smile that held both nerves and determination. "I think so. It's a lot. I've never done anything like this before." Ethan squeezed her hand, offering her a silent promise. "You've already done so much, Lila. The world is waiting to hear what you have to say, and they'll listen." The cameras rolled, and the host introduced Lila and Ethan as they stepped onto the stage. The audience stood and applauded, and for a moment Lila felt a pang of anxiety. The spotlight felt so foreign to her, a woman who had spent so much of her life working quietly behind the scenes. But Ethan was there, standing by her side, giving her the strength she needed to speak her truth. "Thank you," Lila began, her voice steady but soft as she addressed the audience. "It's an honor to be here today, and I'm incredibly humbled to share this moment with you." She paused for a moment, gathering her thoughts before continuing. "I wasn't always in a position to help others. Growing up in foster care, I learned early on that sometimes love is the one thing you don't get. I lost so much, and for a long time, I was angry. But then I realized something important. The love we give to others is what truly matters. It's not about how much money you have or how much you can buy. It's about how much love you can offer and how much good you can do in the world." Ethan stood beside her, his heart swelling with pride. He knew how much this moment meant to her, how much it represented everything they had worked toward together. Lila continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "When I started helping the homeless women and children, I didn't expect anything in return. I didn't think anyone would notice, but what I found was that kindness is contagious. Even the smallest act of giving can spark something bigger than you ever imagined. And that's how change begins, with a single person who believes they can make a difference." Her eyes met Ethan's, and for a moment, she felt a warmth that only he could give her. "I'm here today because of the love and support of one incredible person, Ethan. He's shown me that true wealth isn't about possessions, but about what you can give to others. Together, we've built something that I hope will inspire others to give, to love, and to help. And I want to leave you with this message." Lila took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the faces of the audience, and then she spoke words that would echo in the hearts of many. "It's not about how much you have. It's about how much love you give. Even a small act of kindness can light a life. Whether it's a meal for someone in need, a smile to brighten someone's day, or a moment of your time to listen, those are the things that truly matter. And I hope that you will all find a way to make the world a better place, in your own way, with the gifts you've been given." The room fell silent, and for a long moment, Lila stood there, her heart racing. The applause that followed was thunderous, and tears welled up in her eyes. But she wasn't crying for herself. She was crying for the people who would benefit from the foundation's work, for the lives that would be changed because of her words, and for the love she had found in Ethan. After the broadcast, as the crowd slowly dispersed and the cameras stopped rolling, Ethan took her hand and pulled her into an embrace. "You were amazing," he whispered, his voice full of pride and love. "The world needs to hear that message." Lila smiled softly, her heart full. "Thank you, but it's not just my message. It's ours." They walked out of the studio, hand in hand, knowing that they were creating a future not based on riches, but on love, compassion, and purpose. And as they looked out at the world, they knew that their journey was just beginning. They had learned that true wealth wasn't about material possessions. It was about the love they shared, the kindness they gave, and the impact they made on the world. And together, they would continue to build a future where love was the greatest treasure of all.